The applause in the Marriott ballroom felt like a wave of heat washing over me. On stage, under a spotlight that made his silver hair shine, my husband Richard held the Community Builder of the Year award like it was an Oscar. He was in his element, charming the entire Chamber of Commerce with that folksy smile he'd perfected over 42 years of marriage. He spoke about integrity, about building a legacy, about the importance of family. And then, he looked right at me. Of course, he boomed into the microphone, his voice dripping with sincerity. None of this would be possible without my Ellie. She handles the small stuff, so I can build the big stuff. She's my rock. A few women at our table sighed and looked at me with envy. They saw a devoted husband honoring his wife. I smiled, a perfectly practiced hollow gesture, as my stomach twisted into a knot of ice. Because they didn't know what I knew. They didn't know that his big stuff was a tower of lies, and that my small stuff had recently included uncovering every single one of them. That public praise was the final, patronizing nail in the coffin of our life together. To understand why that seemingly loving tribute was the most profound insult of my life, you need to know what I'd discovered just 3 weeks earlier. To understand why that seemingly loving tribute was the most profound insult of my life, you need to know what I'd discovered just 3 weeks earlier. It all started on a quiet Sunday night, the kind of evening that had been the rhythm of my life for over 40 years. Richard was in the living room watching a football game, the familiar sounds of cheering crowds and commentators echoing faintly down the hall. I was in our small home office, surrounded by the quiet hum of the desktop computer, doing what I always did, managing the small stuff. I was paying the bills, balancing the checkbook, making sure the intricate machinery of our life ran without a single squeak. For me, it wasn't a chore, it was a craft. I knew every dollar that came in and every cent that went out. I could tell you the price of a gallon of milk in 1995. This financial diligence wasn't just about being frugal. It was my contribution, the invisible architecture that supported the life Richard built on the outside. I was clicking through the latest American Express statement online, my eyes scanning the familiar list of charges: Costco, Home Depot, the monthly payment for Richard's Ford F-150. It was all predictable, all accounted for, until it wasn't. My finger froze on the mouse. Tucked between a charge for lumber and our weekly grocery run was a name I'd never seen before, Archespect Pro, and next to it, a recurring monthly charge of $249.99. It wasn't the amount that made my breath catch in my throat, though it wasn't trivial. It was the name. I typed it into Google. The website loaded, sleek and modern, showcasing stunning 3D renderings of futuristic buildings and luxurious homes. The ultimate architectural visualization suite, the tagline read. For the discerning modern architect, I clicked on the pricing page. The software was a high-end professional tool, the kind of thing a partner at a big city firm would use, not a local contractor whose biggest claim to fame was building sturdy, reliable tract homes. Richard's business was built on handshakes and sawdust, on 2x4s and concrete foundations. He used a simple program for estimates, something he'd grumbled about learning a decade ago. This was a whole different ballgame. My first thought, the one born from 4 decades of unwavering trust, was that it had to be a mistake, a fraudulent charge. I felt a wave of relief. Of course, I'd call the credit card company in the morning and sort it out. I almost closed the browser, ready to file it away as a minor annoyance. But a small, cold knot of doubt stopped me. The charges went back 6 months. A fraudster would have been caught. This was intentional. I walked into the living room, the blue light from the television flickering across Richard's face. "Hey, hon," I said, keeping my voice light. I was just paying the Amex bill, and I saw this weird charge. Something called Archespect Pro? Do you know what that is? He didn't even look away from the screen. Oh, yeah, that. It's some new industry requirement for the zoning bids down in the Millfield expansion. Have to submit everything in 3D now. Total pain, but you gotta keep up. My assistant, Kevin, handles all that. He took a sip of his beer, his eyes still glued to the game. The explanation was so smooth, so perfect. It was a neat, tidy box that contained the anomaly and sealed it shut. An old version of me, the one from just 5 minutes prior, would have accepted it without a second thought. I would have nodded, said, "Oh, okay," and moved on, feeling silly for even asking. But something was wrong. Kevin was a kid fresh out of community college who barely knew how to use Excel. And since when did Richard, a man who prided himself on doing things the old-fashioned way, care about keeping up with the latest tech? I didn't say any of that. I just stood there for a moment, watching the game. He'd already forgotten the question. The small stuff was handled. I went back to the office and sat down, but I didn't look at the screen. My gaze drifted past the monitor to the wall, to the framed photos of our kids, our grandkids, of Richard and me on our 25th anniversary, smiling on a cruise ship. My eyes then found their way to the ceiling, towards the attic. I knew what was up there, collecting dust in a heavy cardboard tube, my old blueprints. The plans for a community arts center I designed for my senior thesis in college. The rolled-up, yellowing paper that held the ghost of the architect I was once going to be, before I chose to become the foundation for his dreams instead. I had never once regretted that choice. Not until tonight. I turned back to the computer, my heart beating a little faster now. Richard thought the conversation was over. He thought he'd put my concern to rest with a simple, plausible lie. But what my husband had forgotten, after all these years, was that my talent wasn't just in paying bills, it was in seeing patterns. It was in noticing the one number that didn't add up, the one detail that was out of place. And that night, for the first time in our 42-year marriage, I decided I was going to follow that misplaced number and see just how deep the rabbit hole went. He thought I was his rock. He was about to find out that rock could be a weapon. He thought I was his rock. That night, I waited until the sound of his deep, even breathing filled the silence of our bedroom. I slipped out of bed, my feet silent on the worn hardwood floors, and went back to the office. The house was dark, holding the accumulated quiet of 42 years of shared nights. At 2 a.m., with the glow of the monitor painting my face in a cold, artificial light, I began to dig. My first target was the Archispect Pro website. It was a world away from my life of grocery lists and PTA bake sales. Every page was filled with industry jargon, photorealistic rendering, parametric modeling, BIM integration. It was the language of the woman I might have become, the one who'd pursued her urban planning degree instead of planning family vacations. A pang of something old and forgotten, a dull ache of a different life, resonated in my chest. I pushed it down. That woman was gone. The woman sitting here now had a different job to do. Richard's lie about Kevin the assistant was clumsy, but it gave me a place to start. If Kevin was using the software, there had to be an account, but under what name? I clicked on a tab at the top of the site labeled Community Showcase. It was a gallery, a place where users could share their designs to win awards or just show off their work. It felt like a one-in-a-million shot, but it was all I had. I started scrolling through hundreds of portfolios. They were filled with gleaming skyscrapers, minimalist lofts, and sprawling corporate campuses. None of it felt like Richard. I needed to think like him. What kind of pseudonym would he use? Richard wasn't a creative man. He was practical. He'd choose something simple, something that meant something only to him. I tried searching for Vance Contracting. Nothing. I tried our kids' initials. Nothing. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I thought about the early days, the silly names we used to call each other. There was one, a stupid inside joke from a fishing trip decades ago, Captain Rick. It was so cheesy, so unlike the serious Richard Vance, community builder, that it just might be it. I typed Captain Rick into the search bar, feeling a little foolish. My heart skipped a beat. One result. The profile was sparse, no photo, no bio. Just a single project portfolio titled The Homestead. My hand trembled as I clicked on it. The first image loaded slowly, a high-resolution rendering of a house. It was a stunning, modern farmhouse, all clean lines and dark wood, with a huge wraparound porch and massive windows that overlooked a computer-generated forest. It was beautiful. It was a dream home. And it was a home I had never, ever seen before. I clicked through the gallery. There was the kitchen, with a massive marble island and shiny, top-of-the-line appliances. I saw the great room, with a floor-to-ceiling stone fireplace identical to one I'd once clipped from a Better Homes and Gardens magazine. He'd told me it was too expensive, too impractical for our little brick colonial. There was a master bedroom with a balcony, and two smaller bedrooms, one decorated in blue with baseball pennants, the other in soft yellow with a crib. A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, settled in my stomach. This wasn't a zoning bid. This wasn't some abstract project for a client. The level of detail was too personal, too intimate. This was a home designed to be lived in. loved in. My mind flashed to the attic, to that cardboard tube holding my own designs. My blueprints were a dream I had folded up and put away for him. These digital blueprints, they were a dream he was building without me. I forced myself to think methodically, like I was back in a college seminar. A source is just a source until you verify it. I looked for details, for anything that could ground this virtual house in the real world. In the corner of each rendering, there was a small, transparent watermark. I zoomed in until the pixels blurred. It was text, file metadata. It listed the project name, the date it was rendered, and a location tag. My breath caught. Lot 12, Whispering Pines Lane. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I typed the address into Google Maps. The satellite image resolved, showing a grid of newly paved streets cutting through a swath of cleared forest. It was a luxury development, just outside a small, affluent town 3 hours away, in a part of the state we never visited. I zoomed in on Lot 12. It was just an empty patch of dirt and bulldozed earth, but the shape of the lot perfectly matched the layout in the renderings. It was real. I leaned back in my chair, the pleather creaking in the silent house. The financial discrepancy was no longer just a number on a statement. It had a name, it had an address, it had a stone fireplace and a nursery. Richard wasn't just spending our money. He was building a whole other life, piece by piece, pixel by pixel, right under my nose. This wasn't just an expense, it's a blueprint. The word echoed in the silent house, a single sharp note that cut through the fog of my confusion. Blueprint. For 42 years, that word had belonged to me. It was the language of my past, the ghost of a career I'd lovingly packed away. And now, he had stolen it. He was using it to design a life I had no part in. I pushed away from the desk, my legs unsteady. The digital images of that perfect, sterile farmhouse burned on the screen behind me, but I was no longer seeing them. I was seeing another set of plans, ones drawn not with a mouse and a program, but with a T-square and a graphite pencil on heavy vellum paper. On autopilot, I walked out of the office and pulled down the folding stairs to the attic. The air that descended was cool and smelled of cedar and thyme. Each step creaked, a protest against the intrusion. I hadn't been up here in years. It was Richard's domain, a place for storing old tax records and holiday decorations. But long before that, it had been my sanctuary. A single bare bulb cast long shadows across stacks of forgotten things, our children's old toys, a box of vinyl records, the crib they both used. My eyes scanned the rafters until I found it, tucked away behind a stack of National Geographic magazines, a long gray cardboard tube, sealed at both ends with dusty plastic caps. On the side, in my own neat, youthful cursive, were the words, Eleanor Mathis, Senior Thesis, 1983. Mathis, my maiden name, the name of the woman who drew blueprints. I carried it back downstairs and laid it on the dining room table, the harsh light from the kitchen illuminating the dust motes dancing around it. My hands, now spotted with age, trembled as I worked the cap free. A faint, papery smell, the ghost of ink and ambition, escaped. I carefully unrolled the brittle pages. And just like that, I was 22 again. The memory was so vivid it made me dizzy. I was in our first apartment, the one above the laundromat that always smelled faintly of bleach. I had my drafting table, a gift from my father, set up by the only window. Richard, his hair still dark and thick, was sitting on our lumpy plaid sofa, watching me with an intensity that always made my heart beat faster. I'd just finished the final rendering for my community arts center. It was the culmination of my entire degree, the key to a future I could almost taste. "It's brilliant, Ellie," he said, coming over to look. His voice was full of genuine awe. He traced the lines of the rooftop garden with his finger. "You see things nobody else sees. How to make a space feel alive." I was glowing with pride. "I have my final presentation next week," I told him, my voice buzzing with nervous energy. "Professor Albright thinks I have a real shot at the internship with the City Planning Commission." Richard wrapped his arms around me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. We stood there for a long time, looking at my design. "My business is really starting to take off," he said softly, his voice a low rumble against my back. "Got that big contract for the Henderson subdivision. It's a lot to manage. The books, the invoices, scheduling the subs." He paused. "I need a partner, Ellie. Not just a wife. I need someone I can trust to build this with me." Someone with your brain for details, your genius for organization. I turned in his arms to face him. Richard, I have the internship. I know, he said, his eyes impossibly sincere. And you'd be amazing at it, but that's a job. What we could have, it's a life. We'll build an empire, you and me. You'll be the foundation, the architect behind the scenes. Without you, none of it works. The architect behind the scenes, the foundation. He'd used my own language, the very words of my passion, to offer me a different dream, a shared dream, an American dream. And I, so in love and so full of trust, believed him. I believed in us. That afternoon, I rolled up my blueprints. The crisp sound of the paper surrendering was the sound of a future being put away. I sealed them in the tube, and I sealed that part of myself away with them, choosing to become the foundation for his empire instead of the architect of my own. Back in my kitchen, in the harsh, unforgiving light of 3 a.m., I stared at the yellowed plans on my table. A tear I didn't know I was holding back dripped onto the paper, smudging the ink of a life I never lived. The betrayal wasn't just the lie about the software. It wasn't just the secret house. It was the theft. He had taken the dream I sacrificed for him and was using it to build a new life for someone else. That stone fireplace in his rendering? I saw it now, clear as day. It was the one I'd circled in a magazine years ago. He had taken my taste, my ideas, my very essence, and was building a monument to his deceit with them. I slowly, deliberately, rolled my blueprints back up. My hands were steady now. The grief was still there, a cold, heavy stone in my gut, but something else was there too. A flicker of something hard and sharp. A quiet, cold fury. He had called me his rock, his foundation. He had no idea how right he was. A foundation is what you build on, but it's also what you're left with when the house of lies burns to the ground. A foundation is what you build on, and in that moment, sitting at my dining room table with the ghosts of my past, I knew I couldn't tear that house down alone. I needed an expert. I needed someone who saw the world not in dreams and emotions, but in cold, hard numbers. I needed my daughter. I called Jessica the next morning. My voice was steady, betraying none of the seismic shifts that had occurred in my world overnight. Hi, honey. I know you're busy, but I need your professional opinion on some financials. Can you meet me for coffee? We met at a Panera Bread, that uniquely American space of comforting noise and the smell of baked goods. It was a place for casual lunches and study sessions, not for dismantling a family. Jessica arrived looking exactly like the successful CPA. She was sharp, confident in a tailored blazer, her laptop bag slung over her shoulder. She kissed my cheek and slid into the booth opposite me. "Everything okay, Mom?" she asked, her brow furrowed with a flicker of concern. "You sounded serious." "I'm fine," I lied. I pushed a manila folder across the table. "I just want you to look at something." She opened it and pulled out the printed credit card statements. I'd highlighted the Archispec Pro charges. She glanced at them, a small, dismissive smile playing on her lips. "Okay? It's a software subscription. Probably for the business. Dad's always trying to modernize. He told me his assistant, Kevin, handles it," I said, keeping my voice even. "He said it's for zoning bids." "See?" "Makes sense," she said, already starting to close the folder. She was ready to move on, to file this under Mom's needless worrying. I placed my hand on the folder, stopping her. "Jessica, Kevin doesn't know how to use this kind of software. It's a high-end architectural design suite. It costs $2,500 a year, and it's been charged to our personal Amex, not the business account." Her smile faded. A hint of annoyance crept into her voice. "Mom, what's this about? Dad wouldn't just throw money away. There's an explanation. There's always an explanation." I watched my daughter, this woman I had raised to be so logical and clear-eyed, retreat behind a wall of lifelong conditioning. For 35 years, her father had been the hero of her story. He was the one who coached her softball team, who taught her how to drive, who walked her down the aisle. He was unimpeachable. I was just the mom who handled the small stuff. "I did some digging," I said quietly. I could feel the shift in the air the moment this stopped being a financial question and became an accusation. Jessica crossed her arms, a defensive posture I knew all too well. "Mom, please don't do this. Don't go looking for problems where there aren't any. You know Dad. He's the most honest man I've ever met. Dad wouldn't do that." Her words hung in the air, a testament to the perfect facade Richard had built. I felt a surge of anger, not at her but at him. He had made me the villain in this story before it had even begun. I took a deep breath. Arguing with her emotionally was a losing battle. The daughter would always defend her father, but the CPA had to answer to the facts. I pulled my tablet from my purse and slid it across the table, the screen already open to the Capnick portfolio. I didn't say a word. I just waited. Jessica looked at the screen, her expression confused. "What is this?" "That," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "is where the money is going." She started scrolling. I watched her face as she took it all in. The modern farmhouse, the gourmet kitchen, the wraparound porch. Her professional mask was still in place, but I could see the flicker of something else in her eyes. Then she swiped to the image of the nursery, the soft yellow walls, the white crib. Her hand stopped moving. She stared at that room, a room for a baby that wasn't one of her own children, a room in a house her mother had never seen. She looked up at me, and for the first time the defensive wall in her eyes crumbled. I saw the raw, gaping wound of a child's shattered belief. "This is," she started, her voice breaking. I didn't let her finish the emotional thought. I had to keep her in the professional space. "It's an asset, Jessica. A significant, undeclared asset. He's building it on Whispering Pines Lane, Lot 12. I checked the county records. The lot was purchased 6 months ago, in cash, by a shell corporation I've never heard of." She closed her eyes for a long moment, as if trying to reboot her entire understanding of the world. When she opened them, the hurt was still there, but it was now overlaid with something else. A cold, quiet anger that I recognized as my own. The daughter had been silenced. The CPA was now in charge. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her now cold coffee. She looked at me, her gaze clear and sharp. "Okay," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "Tell me everything, and I mean everything. We need to see just how deep this goes." For the next 2 weeks, my life split into two realities. By day, I was Eleanor Vance, devoted wife. I made Richard his coffee just the way he liked it, with 1.5 sugars. I asked about his day, nodding with feigned interest at stories about lumber prices and subcontractor issues. I played the part I had perfected over a lifetime, and the terrifying thing was how easily it came back to me. But every night, after he was asleep, I would slip down to the office and become a different woman. I became a forensic investigator, with my own daughter as my handler. Jessica and I were a silent, efficient team. We communicated through encrypted messaging apps and shared documents on a secure server. She taught me how to trace IP addresses, how to search public records, and how to spot inconsistencies in financial statements. We became architects of a different kind, drafting not a building, but a case. We discovered the Shell Corporation was registered to a P.O. box in a town he'd supposedly only ever driven through. We found the cash withdrawals, always just under the $10,000 reporting limit, that corresponded with his business trips. The deeper we dug, the more intricate the lies became. Richard wasn't just cheating, he was a meticulous long-term con artist, and I had been his masterpiece. The breaking point, the moment our quiet investigation was forced into a high-stakes gambit, came on a Saturday morning. Richard was in a fantastic mood, humming as he buttered his toast. The sunlight streamed into the kitchen, a picture of domestic tranquility. It was so normal it made my skin crawl. "Ellie," he said, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "I've got some incredible news. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity has come up." I felt a jolt of ice in my veins, but I just stirred my coffee. "Oh? What is it?" "It's a commercial real estate deal. Prime location. The potential return is massive, but we have to move fast. The buy-in is steep." He leaned forward, his eyes alight with the thrill of the deal. It was the same look he'd had when he convinced me to give up my degree. "I need to liquefy some assets to secure our spot." My hand tightened around my mug. "What assets, Richard?" "Well," he said, reaching across the table to cover my hand with his. His touch felt like a spider crawling on my skin. "The smartest move, the one with the best rates, would be to leverage the house. It's paid off. It's just sitting there, dead money. We could take out a line of credit against it and double our net worth in a year." I looked down at his hand on mine. This house, the one where I'd raised our children, nursed them through fevers, and celebrated their birthdays, this foundation I had spent my life maintaining. He wanted to use it to finance the construction of his new life, with his new family, in his new dream home. The audacity of it was breathtaking. I slowly pulled my hand away and placed my spoon down on the saucer. The small, sharp clink was the only sound in the room. It was the only protest I had left. "Richard, that's our home. That's everything we have." He sighed, a practiced, patient sound. The look he gave me was one of affectionate condescension. It was the look you give a child who doesn't understand grown-up things. "Ellie, honey, it's just standard paperwork. It's how people build real wealth. I've got this. When have I ever steered us wrong?" He patted my hand, a gesture of dismissive control that solidified my resolve like quick-setting concrete. "You just handle the small stuff, remember? Let me handle the big picture." This was it. The moment Jessica had warned me might come. The test. My heart was pounding, but my voice came out calm, almost meek. "You're right, of course," I said, looking up at him. "You always know best with these things." He beamed, his ego stoked. "That's my girl." "It's just," I continued, pretending to be hesitant. "Our son Mark was saying we should be more careful with taxes. He said for any new investment, we should really set up an LLC. A limited liability company. It protects our personal assets, like the house if the deal goes south." I was reciting a script Jessica and I had rehearsed for hours. His smile tightened slightly. "An LLC? That's complicated. A lot of extra legal fees. But wouldn't it be safer?" I pressed gently. "I want to be a better partner in this, Richard. I want to understand the big picture, too. If we're going to do this, I want to do it right, the smart way, for our family's future." I used his own words against him: partner, build, family. I watched him process it. My request was logical. It was responsible. To refuse it would seem suspicious. And more importantly, my suggestion framed me as a supportive, if slightly naive, wife trying to be helpful. The last thing he would ever suspect was that I was setting a trap. He finally relaxed, chuckling. "An LLC it is. You're getting sharp in your old age, Ellie." He stood up and kissed the top of my head. "You draw up the paperwork with whoever you want. Just get it done by Friday." That afternoon I met Jessica at her office. We didn't create just any LLC, we created a fortress. The operating agreement she drafted was a work of legal genius. It stipulated that in this new company, I would be the managing member. It gave me oversight of all financial transactions. And buried deep in the bylaws was a clause, a beautiful little tripwire, stating that any use of funds for non-disclosed projects would trigger an immediate transfer of all corporate assets to my sole control. When Richard signed the papers a week later, he barely glanced at them. He just saw my signature next to his, the stamp of approval from his trusting, compliant wife. He thought he was getting the key to a new investment. What I had given him was a key to his own cage. The Trojan horse was inside the gates. And the moment Richard's signature dried on that document, we opened them. What followed was a silent, methodical demolition. As the managing member of our new LLC, I had the legal right to access every financial record connected to Richard's business dealings. Jessica filed the requests, and within days, a torrent of information began flooding our secure server. It was like turning a rock over and finding an entire squirming ecosystem of deceit underneath. Every night, our kitchen table transformed into a war room. Richard would be upstairs, snoring peacefully, oblivious. Downstairs, Jessica and I would be hunched over her laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating a labyrinth of numbers. She was the expert, guiding us through the legal and financial maze. But I was the one who knew the terrain. I was the one who knew Richard's habits, his rhythms, his tells. And after 42 years, I could spot a lie, even when it was hiding in a spreadsheet. I saw the business trips to so-called conferences in cities where he had no clients. Now, I could see the corresponding cash withdrawals from ATMs just a few miles from Whispering Pines Lane. I saw the exorbitant payments to consultants who didn't exist, their invoices all originating from the same IP address, the one connected to his secret Captain Rick profile. He wasn't just building a house, he was funding a ghost payroll to do it. One evening, while tracing a series of large, unexplained transfers, I stumbled upon an account I hadn't seen before. It was for a nonprofit organization Richard had started a few years back, the Vance Veteran Housing Initiative. I remembered it so clearly. He'd thrown a big launch party at the country club. The local news had been there. He'd given a moving speech about his own father's service and the sacred duty we all have to care for our nation's heroes. He'd raised over $250,000 in donations from local businesses and families. My blood ran cold. I clicked open the charity's bank statements. For the first year, the transactions looked normal small grants, administrative fees. But then, the pattern began. Large, round sums, $20,000, $30,000 were being transferred out, month after month. The recipient? The same shell corporation that had purchased the lot on Whispering Pines Lane. I leaned back in my chair. The air knocked from my lungs. It wasn't just our money. It wasn't just my inheritance or our life savings. He was stealing from veterans. He was taking donations meant to put a roof over the heads of homeless heroes and using it to build a luxury farmhouse for his secret family. The man who lectured our children about honesty and hard work, the community builder of the year, was a ghoul, feasting on the goodwill of our entire town. The grief I'd been carrying, that heavy stone of personal betrayal, suddenly burned away. In its place was something clean and hard, like steel. This was bigger than a broken heart. This was about a profound public wrong. This was about justice. That night I went up to the attic and brought down the old cardboard tube. I unrolled my blueprints and laid them out on the table, right next to the spreadsheets detailing Richard's fraud. The two sets of plans sat side by side, the dream I had given up and the nightmare he had built. For the first time in weeks, looking at my old designs didn't bring a pang of regret. It brought clarity. An architect needs precision. They need to understand structure, stress points, and foundations. They need a clear vision of the final product. And my vision was becoming crystal clear. "He's a monster," Jessica whispered, staring at the screen, her face pale. "We have to go to the police." "No," I said, my voice steady. "Not yet. A prison sentence is too easy. It's private. It lets him become a martyr or a victim of the system. He built his reputation in public. He needs to be dismantled in public." For the next week, we worked with a new purpose. We were no longer just investigators. We were prosecutors building an airtight case. We compiled every false invoice, every illegal transfer, every email. We created charts and timelines that showed the flow of money with irrefutable clarity. We packaged it all into a single devastating presentation. We were architects designing a cage, and the final blueprint was almost complete. One afternoon, the mail came. Tucked inside a stack of bills was a thick, cream-colored envelope. I opened it. It was a formal invitation, embossed in gold lettering. The Chamber of Commerce was cordially inviting Mr. and Mrs. Richard Vance to the 28th Annual Community Leadership Awards Gala, where Richard would be honored as the Community Builder of the Year. I stared at the invitation, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. Richard had already built the stage. I was just going to design the final act. Richard had already built the stage. The night of the awards dinner, I wore a simple dark blue dress. It was a dress he'd always called demure, one he said made me look respectable. Tonight, I wanted to be underestimated. I sat at the head table, a perfect portrait of the proud wife, smiling as person after person came up to congratulate him. The ballroom was bathed in that soft golden light that makes everyone look kinder, the air thick with the smell of expensive perfume and roast beef. The clinking of silverware on china was a gentle, constant rhythm beneath the murmur of polite conversation. To everyone else in that room, this was the pinnacle of an American success story. To me, it felt like a wake. When they called his name, the applause was thunderous. He kissed me on the cheek, a dry, public peck, and strode to the stage with the easy confidence of a man who believes he deserves every accolade he receives. He accepted the heavy glass award and stepped up to the podium, looking out at the sea of admiring faces. His speech was a masterpiece of deception. He was humble, he was grateful. He talked about his father teaching him the value of a hard day's work. He spoke of his love for this community and his profound belief in giving back. And then, he turned his gaze to me, his voice softening with that practiced sincerity I now saw for what it was, a performance. "Of course," he boomed, his voice echoing slightly through the sound system. "None of this would be possible without my Ellie. She handles the small stuff, so I can build the big stuff. She's my rock." The room erupted in another wave of applause. I smiled, a small, tight curve of my lips, and nodded, just as I had 1,000 times before. I felt the familiar weight of being relegated to the footnotes of my own life. But tonight, the footnotes were about to become the headline. He returned to the table, flushed with victory, and squeezed my shoulder. "You doing okay, hon? You've been quiet all night." "Just taking it all in," I said. My heart was a cold, steady drum against my ribs. As the dessert plates were being cleared, I stood up. A few people at our table looked at me, surprised. I was never one for public speaking. I gently tapped my water glass with a knife. The clear, high-pitched ring cut through the chatter, and a wave of silence rolled through the room. All eyes turned to me. Richard looked up, a confused but indulgent smile on his face, as if his quiet little wife was about to do something amusing. I walked to the stage, my heels clicking on the polished floor. Each step was deliberate. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, but I only saw one person. I reached the podium and adjusted the microphone, the way I'd seen him do countless times. "Good evening," I began, my voice clear and even. It didn't tremble. I was surprised by that. "I won't take up much of your time. I just want to thank the Chamber of Commerce for this incredible honor they've bestowed upon my husband. He has always been a man dedicated to community building." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. In that spirit of transparency and community, I'd like to present a special community project he's been working on in secret. A project he's poured his heart and a great deal of money into. From my small clutch, I pulled out a simple remote. I'd given a copy of the presentation to the AV technician earlier, telling him it was a surprise tribute. I aimed it at the massive screen behind me and pressed the button. The event logo vanished. It was replaced by a stunning, high-resolution rendering of the modern farmhouse on Whispering Pines Lane. A collective gasp went through the room. I heard whispers, saw people leaning toward each other, their faces etched with confusion. Richard had gone rigid beside me, his folksy smile frozen on his face. "This is the homestead," I announced, my voice echoing in the dead silence. "A beautiful home, designed with meticulous care. You'll notice the gourmet kitchen, the stone fireplace, even a nursery." I clicked again. The image changed to a simple, damning flowchart Jessica had created. On one side was the logo for the Vance Veteran Housing Initiative. On the other, a box labeled The Homestead. A thick red arrow showed a direct flow of over $250,000. "My husband is a visionary," I continued, my voice now as sharp as broken glass. "He saw a way to take a charitable foundation, one funded by the generous donations of many of you in this room, and turn it into a personal construction fund. He took money meant for homeless heroes and used it to build this." The silence in the room was no longer polite. It was absolute. The kind of silence that precedes an explosion. Richard's champagne glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. I turned to look at him, my husband of 42 years. His face was the color of ash. "Simone, what are you doing?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. I turned back to the audience, but the most brilliant part of his plan came just last month. He asked me, his partner who handles the small stuff, to leverage our family home for another investment. And I agreed. I clicked the remote one last time. The screen showed a single page, the signature page of our LLC agreement, with a legal clause highlighted in yellow. You see, I decided it was time I started handling the big picture too. The LLC he so carelessly signed into gives me, as the managing member, sole control over all assets in the event of financial misconduct, which means, as of this moment, I own Vance Contracting. I let that sink in. Then I leaned into the microphone, my eyes locked on his. "It turns out, Richard," I said, my voice dropping to an intimate, lethal whisper that carried to every corner of the room. "I handle the big stuff too." For a full 10 seconds, the only sound in the Marriott ballroom was the faint hum of the air conditioning. It was a silence so complete, so heavy, it felt like a physical weight pressing down on all of us. No one moved. No one breathed. They just stared, their faces a gallery of shock, confusion, and dawning horror. Richard stood frozen, his hand still outstretched from where his champagne glass had fallen. The spotlight that had moments ago been his coronation now felt like an interrogation lamp. Then, the first crack in the silence. A single phone buzzed on a table, a notification lighting up its screen. Then another, and another. In a wave, the digital world caught up to the analog one. The story was already breaking. Muffled whispers started to ripple through the room like a contagion. People weren't looking at me with pity anymore. They were looking at Richard with a kind of morbid fascination, the way you look at a car wreck. He finally broke his paralysis, turning to his oldest friend and business partner, Dave Ramsey, who was sitting at our table, his face as white as the tablecloth. "Dave," Richard stammered, his voice a ragged plea. "This is insane. It's a misunderstanding. She's not well." Dave didn't even look at him. He was staring at his own phone, at a news alert from the local business journal that had just gone live. He slowly looked up, not at Richard, but at me. I saw 40 years of friendship and trust curdle into disgust right before my eyes. He shook his head, a small final gesture of severance. Then he stood up, tossed his linen napkin onto his half-eaten dessert, and walked away without a word. That was the signal. The dam broke. People started to stand, not in a panic, but with a kind of grim purpose. They were backing away from our table as if it were contaminated. The community that had just honored him was now collectively exiling him in a silent, brutal consensus. Richard spun around, his eyes wild, looking for an ally, a friendly face, anyone. But he found none. He was an island, and the tide was going out. I didn't stay to watch the rest. My part was done. I picked up my clutch, turned my back on the wreckage of my marriage, and walked out of the ballroom. I didn't run. I walked with a straight back and a steady pace, my heels clicking a quiet, rhythmic beat on the marble floor. I could feel his eyes on my back, but I never looked back. An architect supervises the demolition, but they don't have to sift through the rubble. The next 48 hours were a blur of coordinated, devastating precision. Jessica had been waiting in the hotel lobby. From our makeshift command center in my hotel suite, we watched the empire crumble, not with glee, but with the detached satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed. At 7 a.m. the next morning, the board of Vance Contracting issued an emergency press release. Richard was suspended, effective immediately, pending an investigation into severe ethical and financial misconduct. By noon, the local news channels, the ones that had celebrated him for years, were running his picture next to headlines that screamed fraud and embezzlement. The story of the veterans' charity was particularly toxic. It wasn't just a betrayal of a wife, it was a betrayal of a community's trust and a nation's heroes. He had become a villain overnight. At 2:15 p.m., Jessica got a notification. Acting on the authority of the LLC agreement, our lawyer had successfully frozen every single one of Richard's personal and corporate accounts. His credit cards, his debit cards, his line of credit, every financial artery was severed. The community builder was now, for all intents and purposes, penniless. I didn't hear from him. He tried calling Jessica a dozen times, but she let every call go to voicemail. His messages, which she played for me, were a frantic, desperate spiral from rage to pleading to incoherent sobbing. The final, definitive image of his downfall came 2 nights later. Jessica had a friend who worked the graveyard shift at a gas station on the interstate, about 50 miles out of town. She sent Jessica a security camera still. Jessica just turned the phone to me without a word. The picture was grainy, date stamped at 3:12 a.m. There was Richard. Not the titan of industry from the ballroom, but a haggard, unshaven old man standing under the harsh fluorescent lights of the convenience store. He was wearing the same tuxedo, now rumpled and stained. He was holding a single cup of coffee. The cashier, a tired-looking kid, was pointing at the card reader, which was clearly displaying a declined message. I stared at the photo for a long time. The man who built an empire, who controlled millions, who held the power of a god in our small world, couldn't afford a $2 cup of coffee. He was stranded, unplugged, and utterly alone. The foundation he thought was made of money and reputation had proven to be nothing but sand, and the tide had finally gone out. In the week that followed, I didn't return to our house. It was no longer a home. It was a crime scene, cluttered with the ghosts of 1,000 lies. Instead, I worked out of a small, soulless temporary office that Jessica had rented for me downtown. It smelled of new carpet and stale coffee, a sterile space for a messy demolition. The phones rang constantly. Lawyers, accountants, reporters, and former friends of Richard's, all calling to either pledge their support or extract a pound of flesh. I had become, overnight, the reluctant executor of my husband's legacy. I was fielding a call from a forensic accountant when my personal cell phone buzzed. It was my son, Mark. I braced myself. Mark was the historian in the family, the keeper of our stories. He was the sentimental one, the one who idolized his father the most. Unlike Jessica, who could retreat into the cold logic of numbers, Mark's world was built on the narratives he'd been told his entire life. And I had just burned the library to the ground. I let the call go to voicemail. I wasn't ready. He called back 2 minutes later. And again. On the fourth try, I finally answered, my voice quiet. "Hello, Mark?" Silence. Then, a choked, ragged breath that sounded like a sob. "Mom? I'm here, honey." I saw it," he stammered, his voice thick with tears. "All of it. Jessica sent me the files. The bank statements. The charity. Mom, the veterans." His voice broke completely. I waited. There was nothing I could say. He had to walk through the rubble of his own childhood memories. He had to see the truth for himself. "I didn't want to believe it," he whispered, his voice cracking. "When the news first broke, I thought you were just angry, that you were trying to hurt him. I'm so ashamed." "You loved your father," I said, my own voice surprisingly gentle. "You saw the man he wanted you to see." "No," he said, and his voice was suddenly sharp with self-recrimination. "No, I saw the man I wanted to see. The builder, the guy who could fix anything, the hero." He took another shuddering breath. "I was over at the house yesterday. I went up to the attic to get some of my old college textbooks, and I saw it, on the dining room table. My heart stopped. My blueprints. I'd left them there. I unrolled it, Mom. The art center. I remember you showing it to me when I was a little kid. You were so proud of it." He was openly weeping now, the raw, unfiltered grief of a man whose entire history had just been rewritten. All these years, all my life. I heard him tell that story about how you two were a team, how he built the business and you built the home. I always saw Dad as the builder, the one making everything. He paused, and the words that came next were the ones that would rebuild me from the inside out. "I never realized," he said, his voice raw with the agony of his new understanding, "that you were the architect of our entire lives." I closed my eyes. The sterile beige walls of the office dissolved around me. For 42 years, I had been the foundation unseen, uncredited, buried beneath the structure of everyone else's life. I had accepted it. I had even taken a quiet pride in it. But I had never, not once, been seen as the designer, the visionary, the one who drew the plans. To hear those words, from my son, the one who revered his father's strength above all else, it was a validation so profound it felt like a physical release, like a 40-year-old weight being lifted from my soul. A single tear traced a path down my cheek, but it wasn't a tear of sadness, it was a tear of gratitude, of recognition. "Thank you for saying that, Mark," I whispered. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he said, his voice full of a lifetime of regret packed into a single moment. "I'm so sorry I never saw it." "You see it now," I said. "That's all that matters." When the call ended, I sat in the silence of the office for a long time. The phones had stopped ringing. The chaos had receded. I looked at the stacks of paper on my desk, legal briefs, financial statements, the messy debris of a demolished life. It looked like an impossible task. But for the first time, I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt capable. The architect had finally been acknowledged, and now she could get to work on her new design. 6 months later, the air doesn't smell of old paper and stale coffee. It smells of fresh-cut pine, damp earth, and the faint metallic scent of welding. Instead of the quiet hum of a computer, the soundtrack to my life is the roar of a cement mixer, the rhythmic pop of nail guns, and the shouts of men in hard hats. I'm standing on a muddy patch of ground, a white hard hat sitting comfortably on my head, and in my hands I'm holding a set of blueprints. They're not yellowed and brittle. They are crisp, new, and smell of sharp, blue ink. This isn't Whispering Pines. After the legal dust settled, I sold that cursed plot of land to the developer next door. No, this is a different piece of ground, a forgotten lot on the edge of town that Richard's company had owned for years, writing it off as worthless. It turns out it's the perfect location for a community. After the demolition, I had a choice. I could have liquidated Vance Contracting, taken the money, and retired to a quiet life. I could have let the name become a permanent stain on our town's history. But that felt like letting him have the last word. It felt like an ending, and I was just getting started. So I did something else. I went to the bank, armed with Jessica's flawless legal paperwork and a business plan I'd stayed up for a week writing. I didn't dissolve the company, I took it over. I fired the cronies who had enabled his lies and promoted the honest, hard-working people he'd always overlooked. And I gave it a new name, the Vance Initiative. The money we recovered from the fraudulent charity, every single stolen dollar, became our seed funding. The assets from the LLC, the company he thought would finance his escape, became our capital. We were going to build veteran housing, not as a scam, not as a tax write-off, but for real. Homes built with integrity, funded by justice. Eleanor, a young woman in her late 20s, her own hard hat askew, approaches me holding an iPad. She's Sarah, a brilliant young designer I hired right out of graduate school. She reminds me a little of myself, before I rolled up my own dreams. The framers on Unit 3 have a question about the load-bearing wall in the kitchen, she says, pointing to a detail on her screen. The original plan calls for a standard header, but with the open concept layout, I'm worried it won't be enough support over time. I look at the schematic, my eyes tracing the lines. The architect in me, the one who had been dormant for 42 years, wakes up instantly. You're right, I say without hesitation. It's not enough. Tell them to double the studs on either side and switch to a laminated veneer lumber beam. It'll cost a little more in materials, but it's the right way to do it. A foundation has to be solid. Sarah's eyes light up. That's a great idea. It'll make the whole structure more secure. She smiles, a look of genuine respect. Thanks, Eleanor. She walks away, shouting instructions to the foreman. I watch her go, and a feeling of profound satisfaction settles over me. I'm not just signing checks. I'm not just managing the small stuff. I'm here, on the ground, making decisions, solving problems, building something real, something that will last, something that will provide a safe harbor for people who deserve it. I look down at the blueprints in my hands. They are for a small 2-bedroom home designed to be accessible, affordable, and filled with light. It's a simple design, but it's honest. It's a home, not a fantasy. I think of Richard's digital farmhouse, that sterile, perfect image of a life that never was. He was building a stage set. I'm building a community. The autumn sun is warm on my face. I look out at the skeleton of the first building, its wooden frame stark against the bright blue sky. It's more beautiful than any computer rendering. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, because it's real, and it's only the beginning.